Okay, last time I presented on this, I actually didn't have sound. Hopefully, the sound works on this today. Okay, the Roman Republic. It wasn't built in a day. Okay, we say that about Rome and its buildings, but we also will say that about the Republic because the Republic took a while to build. Now, today's notes, you're going to focus on Rome's government and compare it with the government of the United States. That's what we're going to be looking for. Okay, so as you take notes, I'll jump back and forth between the Roman government and the American government. Ask the substitute to pause video when you need to. Don't pause it after every slide because that's way too much. But only when you need to, and so you can finish the notes on that section. Don't write everything; just get the main idea. Okay. When you pause the video, if you pause it, talk to each other. Say, okay, what's on this? What do we need? And share your notes with each other. Okay, the question I'll be asking at the end of this is, did the founders of the United States create a better government than the ancient Roman government? I want 3 reasons, okay, that support your answer. Okay, the government. Really, we're looking at the American government, but we're also looking at Athens and Rome a little bit. If I put Athens down there, you'll see why in a second. But when our founders wanted to overthrow the monarchy, the English monarch, King George III, they wanted to move our government to a more democratic model. They wanted to include more people in the government. They didn't want just one ruler. Now, England was ruled by a constitutional monarch, which means the King of England was not all powerful. He did not, his word was not law. They had the parliament, which had to vote on laws and pass laws. So his powers were limited. And our founding fathers saw that as a step in the right direction, but they didn't want one person to be in charge. Okay, they want more people in that political process. So the question of how or what government would be best, an oligarchy is ruled by a few, and that's where you bring just a few people in, and they set the laws. When Parliament first started off, they did have just the lords. Okay, the lords, the nobles would advise the king, but then as it moved on, they became more democratic. Now, a republic is a representative democracy. Okay, now a republic is more democratic than a monarchy or an oligarchy, but it's not a democracy. Okay, democracy is where one person votes on everything. Okay, representative democracy or republic is where we vote for people to vote for us. So they represent us. They represent our needs and concerns. Now, when our founding fathers looked at history, they looked at the Roman Republic, and they also looked at Athenian democracy. In the Roman Republic, they thought, it lasted for 465 years. It was fairly stable. And they saw that it increased its enfranchisement, who could vote, who could participate in government as it went on. Now, Athenian democracy, it did evolve a bit. And there was a really good period between 460 and about 320 where they had full democracy. But that full democracy was a little bit scary to our founding fathers. When they looked at the history, okay, they went to war with, really the Persian Wars were caused by the democracy because a person went to Sparta and asked Sparta to help them in Ionia to fight the Persians, and the 2 kings said, "You're crazy." Okay, they said, "No, this is not going to happen." But he went to Athens. He asked them the same question, and he was persuasive enough that he got the majority to support him. And so Athens voted to support the Ionian city-states. And so that really brought Athens into those Persian wars and brought problems on Athens. And so immediately, right after they became a democracy, they got into problems. Now, the problems, even though they were involving all their male citizens, the problems didn't just stop there because in 406 BCE, toward the end of the Peloponnesian War, they voted to execute 6 of their generals, even when they won the battle that they were debating. And so they became irrational. People could sway them as a mob. Popular democracy for our founding fathers was a little bit scary. And when you look at 399, we didn't talk about this when we finished off Greece, but in 399, they voted for Socrates to commit suicide. He was actually given a choice. He could be exiled or commit suicide. And since he was an old man, he said, I'll just commit suicide because I don't want to move from Athens. His crime was poisoning the minds of the youth. Okay, he was teaching them to question, and the people thought that was a danger. Okay, and after they survived the Persian War, the plague, and all those problems, and we didn't go into it, but they had a small oligarchy that ruled Athens for a while. So after about 399 to about 320, even though they had full democracy, it wasn't super powerful. It fell apart pretty quickly. So our founding fathers looked at these two governments and they thought, the republic is more stable. Republic, you vote for people, they will go in and they will represent you, and those people will probably be more educated, make better decisions. They won't be a mob like the democracy. Okay, the democracy was mob-like. You could sway the mob toward one side or the other, and so our founding fathers saw that and went, "Let's go with the republic." Now, when we look at, I want to look at Roman society real fast. Okay, Roman society, you have two main groups who are citizens. You have the plebeians and the patricians. The patricians are the nobles. These are the wealthy families. These are the people that are connected to the Rome's founders. They own businesses, they're large landowners, they have all the wealth or most of the wealth. But they are really much the minority of the population. Okay, most of the Romans were plebeians. Sometimes they're called plebes. But plebes were the middle class and on down to the lower classes. But they were the workers. They were the people that ran society pretty much. Okay. Now, initially in Rome, only Roman citizens could serve in the military. That would change over time. Okay. Now, a couple of groups that were not included in their republic, women and slaves. Now, we also have people that are conquered that are outside, but this is early in the republic. Okay, so Rome is just a tiny city state. It's not the empire that we see later on. As they start to expand in the late Republican times, they will have people who they've conquered that will not be citizens or slaves or patricians. Okay, and so they're outside that network, and so you have this very small group of Roman citizens. Being a citizen of Rome was huge. It gave you different rights than other people that lived in the empire. Kind of a side note. Okay, when our republic was founded, women were not included. Neither were slaves. Okay, minorities were not included. In fact, there was a debate that said, "Hey, maybe we should just let people who own land, basically our patrician class, just the people who own land who could vote, and cut the people who are poor out." Eventually, that was decided against, and so they included, I'll say, the American plebeians, the workers, in with the group of the landowning aristocrats of the early United States. As time goes on, Rome does expand its electorate. The plebeians become part of the government. The women never do. Slaves never do either. But the plebeians, they do. Now, in our society, after the Civil War or during the Civil War, slaves were set free. And later on, after the Civil War, they were granted rights to be full citizens where they could vote, everything else. But even after that, they were discriminated against all the way through the civil rights movement. And even now, we still have elements of racism in our society. We see it now very much, with this last summer, the Black Lives Matter movement, the racism against our Asian Americans. We are still very sexist, and we still have a lot of things to overcome. But we have brought people into our process, and so that's, I think, a positive. Now, I said that Rome expanded its who was in the government, and there at the top we have the women, patricians, plebeians. Now, initially, Rome was pretty much an oligarchy, even though they called themselves a republic. Okay, you can be a republic and have very few people who are voting. China is a republic, but only about 5% of the population votes. In early Rome, the patricians were the only people who would vote, and they were the only ones that would control the government. But fairly quickly, after 508 BC or 509 BC, the plebeians won the right to become their own assembly, and so they started to vote as well. And we'll see an office later on too, where there's an office that will protect plebeians from patricians. Now, by 367 BCE, the plebeians actually are consuls, and we'll look at what the consuls are here in a minute. But you can see down here, we have two consuls, we have the magistrates, we have tribunes, and the Senate, and they all revolve around the assembly. We'll see this pop back up a couple of times because I'm going to go into some more detail on those. Okay, in the United States, we separate our powers too. Okay, we have the executive branch. Okay, balance of powers: the executive branch, legislative branch, judicial branch. Those are the three branches of our federal government. Um, Now, our legislative branch is generally broken into, it's called bicameral, bi meaning two, cameral means houses. So you see the two wings on that house, one side is the Senate, one side is the House of Representatives. And so we do incorporate some of the ideas of ancient Rome. We take the Senate, we take the assemblies, and we have the House of Representatives, and we use them as part of our legislative process. And we'll see that as we talk about Rome a little bit more. The executive branch is pretty much the consuls, and the magistrates are the judicial system. Although I'd say that Rome only had two branches. It was really the executive and the legislative. Um, the judicial was kind of wrapped up in with the executive. Okay, we'll talk about that in a second. So here is that Roman separation of powers. We have the magistrates. They list the consuls. Okay, I told you earlier that the magistrates would be judges, but the consuls are kind of the president as well. And we'll see what they do here in a minute. But they run the government. They judge court cases. They serve for 1 year. They had strict term limits. Now the Senate. It was very much just an advisory council. They could not vote and do anything. Later on, they'll get some more powers. Now, the assemblies, it's pretty complicated. And I have a diagram at the end of this that will show you how complicated it is because there's more than one assembly, but they represented the common people. Now, this was not really representative democracy because it's just complicated how they divide it up. Okay, there's, I think, at least three assemblies. We have the Council of the Centuries. We'll come to it later on. I'll show it to you later on. Okay, now the consuls first. Let's look at them. The consuls are the executive branch. Okay, they're elected by the assemblies. And so people don't vote for the consul. The assemblies do. And they serve for a single term, but they can serve again, just not consecutively. So they can't serve 2 years in a row. Now they hold the supreme head of state, political and military leaders. Now, the way they balance their consuls is each consul, they have two consuls, they can veto each other. So one person cannot make decisions for the entire country of Rome. It's fascinating because later on in Rome's history, they're in a battle with Hannibal, the Punic Wars, and they have two consuls, and they both disagree on how to run the war. And so they actually trade leadership for the leading the army every other day. And when we get to the Punic Wars, I'll show you what happens there. Now, their symbol of authority, purple. Purple is a color of royalty, and consuls were allowed to have a purple band on their toga. Okay, the fasces. These are a bundle of axes and rods around the axe, and that symbolizes their legal authority. And then they are also given the sella curilis, which is the chair that they can rule from. So it's almost like a throne. I wouldn't say a throne, though, and I would probably get killed if the Roman heard me say that. Let me go back. The praetors, the plebeians, actually won the right to become consuls in 367, and by 342, one of the consuls had to be a plebeian. Okay, and so we see that. adding to their power. Okay. Now, let's see. Look on down here. Off to the side here, we have the Tribune. I'm not going to worry too much about the ADL, ADIL. The Casters, we'll look at those guys later on too. Now, a praetor is kind of a vice consul. They could sit on the Senate and they could also manage the military deeds. Up at the top, you see this term of dictator. In emergencies, they could vote a dictator in for up to 1 year. Now, a dictator had supreme control of the entire country. Rome is very proud about its limits on power, and dictators were used not very frequently. Okay, they were limited very much. One of the first dictators that kind of set the tone for dictators was a dictator named Cincinnatus. And Cincinnatus was there's a war, and a Roman legion was going to get wiped out, and they came to Cincinnatus, who had been a consul before, and they asked him to come lead. And he was out working in his field. They always, all the stories I see say he was out there working without a shirt on, and he didn't want to become the dictator, but they said, "We need you." He did it, and 2 weeks later, he had won the war, brought this Roman legion back, and went back to his farm and started working again. And so he only was a dictator for 15 days. Okay, in American government, we have something called martial law. Okay, martial law is where we can suspend rules for a bit. So if there's a natural emergency, a natural disaster, if there's riots, that sort of thing, domestic unrest, they can suspend our rights and say, nope, we got to get things under control. And once things are under control, then you can have your rights back. Okay. And so we do kind of have a dictatorship in our own government. Now, a censor over there, off to the consul, those people would do the census. Every 5 years, the censor would go through the entire country, or create that census and count people to make sure that they're getting the right taxes paid to them. Now you can also see the patrician and plebeian side there. Now the Senate, okay. This is really, they didn't have much power at all. These were basically an advisory group. Now, if you look at the American Senate, in the American Senate, they still have that role in foreign policy where they advise and consent. They will approve of treaties, that sort of thing. They will approve of people who serve in the White House. Now, in the Senate, they were not paid for this. Okay, they were in the ancient Roman times. Nowadays, senators are paid, but in ancient Rome, they would not get paid. It was not a way to make, well, senators would make money, but not through the official office. And I already hinted to you guys a little bit that senators would often have slaves who would open businesses for them, and they would have the slave earn the money, and the senator would profit from that slave. Now, they served for life. Now, they couldn't engage in foreign trade or banking, so they were very limited in how they could operate. Now, the Senate does eventually get control of state finances, okay? And so they can spend money and control spending. And that is one way they could control legislation. Later on, when we look at the Gracchus brothers, there are some laws passed to help poor people, but the Senate holds that money back. And so they can't actually fund that law. And so controlling that purse string is pretty important. And you see it says they control the purse. When you say they control the purse, that means they control the money. Now, in our government, the legislative branch controls the purse. Okay, the president cannot spend any money without the legislative branch allocating money to them to spend. Now, the executive branch can propose a budget, but they can't pass that budget without the Congress and Senate voting that in. And the judges, our judicial branch has no right to spend any money. They may legislate, or not legislate, but they may rule from the bench that some things have to be done, but they don't have any way to spend or collect that money. Now, the assemblies. Oh my goodness, this is confusing, but that's okay. Okay. We have our own assembly. Now, the assembly is that legislative branch. Now, there's more than one assembly. The oldest one is a committee of centuries, and they're divided into groups of 100. And each group of 100 would have one vote. And this is the oldest of them. Okay, these are the plebeian branch. These not the plebeian, but the patrician branch. Okay, and initially that's all they had was just this committee of centuries. But shortly after, in 494, so about 14 years after or 15 years after the Roman Republic was founded, the plebes went on strike and they forced the patricians to grant them the Council of Plebes. Okay, and so the Council of Plebes could pass laws that applied only to plebes up until about 287 BCE, when those laws that the House of Plebes passed would apply to everyone. Okay, now another assembly is called the Tribal Assembly. Now there are 35 tribes in Roman. Let's see, I don't even know what to call it. It's Roman society. And so they would vote as tribes. And they were based on the ancestors of Rome. And I'm not sure how exactly, which committee could pass the law or how those laws were enacted. But these are the people, the assemblies could enact laws, name magistrates or judges, name tribunes. We haven't talked about tribunes yet. And it wasn't really democratic, but they did represent all the people of Rome. When you see that word or that acronym SPQR, Senatus and Populus QUE, that's K, Rome. Okay, the Senate and people of Rome, that's what it stands for. So the assemblies saw themselves as serving the Senate and people of Rome. Let's go to the next one. Okay, now the tribunes. The tribunes are kind of interesting. If you remember back a couple slides, it had the tribunes under the plebeians. There were up to 10 tribunes. And this is kind of what Rome's constitution was. Okay, the Roman government did not have a written document that said, these are the rules. Okay, the United States has what's called the Constitution, which are it's actually the rule book for our government. It tells you how long the president can serve, how long the House of Representatives can serve, how long the Senate can serve, the judges. It tells you what our rights are, okay, what the government cannot do. It tells us many, many things. Okay, so that is our Constitution. In Rome, they didn't have that. They had the tribunes, and there were 10 of them. Now, they were elected to one-year terms. Now, these they presided over the Senate, and their primary job was to protect the plebeians from patrician abuse. Okay, patricians could bully the plebeians. I'll say it that way. They could bully the plebeians in lots of different ways, and so plebeians could, or if they could make it to a tribune could actually veto a magistrate's decision toward the plebes. A tribune could veto any other tribune's decision, anyone that was his rank or lower. And so the tribunes are that protective body that protects the people from the government. Okay. Now, quaestors, these are people that run the finances, and we saw them down on that patrician side. Now, the aediles, these are people that were at the top of that plebeian side, and they really managed the temples, but they also did the infrastructure, the roads, and that sort of thing. But by the time we get to the Roman Empire, they're no longer around. Okay, now this is kind of confusing. Let me get my picture out of the way, all the way, if I can. Okay, here we have the checks and balances of the Roman Republic. Now, they do call it the Constitution of the Republic, but there is no real constitution. This is just practice. Okay, and so you see the Committee of the Centuries up at the top, and you see the Senate. Okay, you see the Tribune or the Tribal Assembly, and also the Council of Plebes. So, and then what they can control. Okay, plebeian aediles, the tribunes, and the tribunes can veto any act of these bodies. We have the executive magistrates, who are judges, the consuls, the praetors, the censors, the quaestors, and then the patrician aediles. Okay. Now, here is the checks and balances for The American government, okay, the executive is supposed to enforce the law. Okay, these are the law enforcement, but this is what the legislative branch can do to combat the power of the executive, and this is what the judicial branch can do to combat the executive. Now, legislative branch makes the laws. Here's what the executive branch can do, and here's what the judicial branch can do. Now, these are people, the judges interpret the law, and the executive appoints judges, and they approve the judges. And so they have checks and balances against all three. In Rome, consuls could veto other consuls, tribunes could veto magistrates, you could veto other tribunes or quaestors or other people down the line if you outrank them. And so it's interesting to see the checks and balances and how they survived. Okay, again, okay, what is the focus of your notes today? You're comparing Rome's government with the government of the United States. And the question, did the founders create a better government than ancient Rome? Okay, give 3 reasons to support your answer. I'll be back on Thursday. Hope you guys are doing well.